What if I told you half the facts we learned in school are basically historical fan fiction? From royal PR stunts to lies that went viral before memes even existed, history is full of stories we've been repeating for centuries, without ever checking if they're true. Welcome to Archivefacts, where we dig up the truth beneath history's greatest myths. Today, we're tearing through 15 of the dumbest, weirdest, and most persistent fake facts ever told. Let's start with a big one. 1. The Great Wall of China. You've heard this one since childhood. It's the only man-made object visible from the moon. Sounds poetic, right? A monument so massive it can be seen from space. Except, it can't. Astronauts have repeatedly confirmed that you can't even reliably see the wall from low Earth orbit, let alone the moon. Why? Because while it's incredibly long, over 13,000 miles, it's only about 20 feet wide. From space, it blends perfectly into the surrounding terrain, like trying to spot a single human hair from 2 meters away. The myth started centuries before space travel and stuck around because it just felt too grand to question. 2. The sewer alligators of New York. A baby alligator flushed down a toilet, mutating into a giant blind albino monster that stalks the sewers. It's one of the greatest urban legends ever told. But here's the truth. There's zero evidence any colony of sewer alligators ever existed. The story first appeared in newspapers in the 1930s, possibly inspired by exotic pet trends. In reality, the sewers are cold, dark, and chemically toxic, not exactly prime reptile real estate. Sanitation workers who've spent decades underground haven't found a single pale gator, only rats and bad plumbing. It's a myth that survives simply because we want it to be true. 3. The Illuminati. Secret societies controlling the world. The all-seeing eye on the dollar bill. Here's the hilarious truth. The Bavarian Illuminati was real, and it was a total flop. Founded in 1776, it was a small group of Enlightenment intellectuals trying to promote reason over religion. They lasted less than a decade before being banned by the government. No global domination, no hidden meetings, just a handful of nerds arguing about philosophy and snacks. The modern, world-controlling cabal version. That came centuries later from conspiracy theorists and bored writers. 4. St. Patrick and the snakes. The legend says St. Patrick drove all the snakes out of Ireland, a miracle of faith and divine power. Except there's a problem. Ireland never had snakes to begin with. After the Ice Age, the island was separated from the mainland long before any slithering reptiles could migrate over. So where did the story come from? The snakes were actually a metaphor for pagan religions that St. Patrick sought to replace with Christianity. He didn't banish reptiles, he banished rival belief systems. Basically, it was religious rebranding that got mythologized into a blockbuster miracle. 5. Absinthe, the hallucinogen. Absinthe. The mysterious green drink blamed for madness, visions, and genius. Writers and painters in 19th century Paris swore it made them hallucinate. But here's the truth. That reputation was cooked up by the French wine industry, terrified of losing business. They launched a smear campaign, claiming absinthe caused insanity and even murder. In reality, absinthe's hallucinogenic chemical, thujon, exists only in trace amounts. You'd die of alcohol poisoning 10 times over before it made you trip. The truth is simpler. The artists weren't inspired by visions. They were just really, really drunk. 6. The Lemming suicide myth. We've all seen that old footage. Tiny lemmings plunging off cliffs in a suicidal frenzy. But that tragic, natural behavior, totally fake. For the 1958 Disney documentary White Wilderness, filmmakers couldn't get the footage they wanted. So, they bought lemmings, took them to a cliff, and herded them off the edge with brooms. Yes, they literally pushed them off to dramatize the story. The film even won an Oscar. It wasn't a documentary. It was animal cruelty disguised as cinema. 7. Diamonds are rare. Here's one of the greatest marketing scams ever pulled off. Diamonds aren't rare. They're one of the most common gemstones on Earth. In the early 20th century, De Beers monopolized the diamond trade, hoarded massive supplies, and released them slowly to create the illusion of rarity. Then they ran the iconic ad campaign, "A diamond is forever." It wasn't just about selling jewelry, it sold a belief that diamonds meant eternal love. They didn't invent romance, they just monetized it. 8. Elementary, my dear Watson, the most famous Sherlock Holmes quote. He never said it. In all of Arthur Conan Doyle's stories, Holmes says elementary, and he says, my dear Watson, but never together. The combined catchphrase was popularized decades later in plays and early films. It became so iconic that people now remember a line that never existed. Congratulations, your brain just Mandela affected itself. 9. Columbus and the Flat Earth. We're taught that Christopher Columbus proved the world was round, bravely sailing off despite warnings he might fall off the edge. But people in the Middle Ages already knew the Earth was round. Educated Europeans had been reading Aristotle and Ptolemy for centuries. The real argument wasn't about shape, it was about size. Columbus's critics said his calculations were wrong, and they were right. He thought the Earth was smaller than it is. If the Americas hadn't been in the way, his ships would have run out of supplies long before reaching Asia. 10. The Unsinkable Titanic. Everyone knows the Titanic was famously advertised as unsinkable. But the White Star Line never said that. They called it practically unsinkable, which is very different. After the tragedy, journalists dropped the practically because unsinkable ship sinks made a perfect headline. The myth stuck because it perfectly captured human arrogance and sold a lot of newspapers. 11. Cleopatra, the seductive queen. Hollywood paints Cleopatra as an Egyptian bombshell who seduced Rome with her beauty. In reality, Cleopatra was Greek, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty that descended from Alexander the Great's generals. Ancient coins show she wasn't conventionally beautiful, but she was brilliant. She spoke 9 languages, mastered politics, and charmed both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony with her intellect and charisma, not her looks. She didn't just survive in a man's world, she ruled it. 12. Newton's apple. The story goes that Newton sat under a tree, got hit by an apple, and suddenly understood gravity. The truth? He saw an apple fall while looking out his window and started thinking. No slapstick bonk, just quiet observation and curiosity. The idea that the world's greatest scientific breakthrough came from a concussion is pure myth-making. 13. The Iron Maiden. That terrifying spiked coffin used for torture. A complete fabrication. No evidence shows it was ever used in the Middle Ages. It was probably built in the 1700s as a macabre museum piece to shock visitors. Medieval people were plenty brutal, but this cinematic torture device was pure fiction. The kind of thing you'd find in a haunted house, not a dungeon. 14. Baseball's inventor. Americans love to credit Civil War General Abner Doubleday with inventing baseball. In truth, the story was manufactured in 1907 by a commission looking for a purely American origin story. Instead of admitting it, evolved from the British game of rounders. They basically picked a famous dead general and said, yeah, he did it. Doubleday never wrote about baseball once in his life. The sport's national origin story was patriotic fiction. 15. General Tso's chicken. That sweet, sticky classic from every takeout menu. Totally American. The real General Tso was a 19th century Hunanese military leader, and his dish was invented in New York in the 1970s by a Chinese chef adapting flavors for American taste buds. If you ordered it in China, they'd look at you like you were crazy. The general never tasted it, but he's now the face of fried chicken diplomacy. And that's just the first half of history's biggest lies. Because the next 18 myths, they get even wilder. From Trojan horses to fake Spartans, mummy curses, and Da Vinci conspiracies. Hit like, subscribe, and get ready for part 2, right here on Archivefacts, where we keep history weird and the facts straight.